Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
You know, it's funny, when we announced last week that Vice President Joe Biden would be joining us here at the URJ Biennial, a few people I know had the same reaction. Wow, that's terrific. How did you get the Vice President to agree to be there? I'm tempted to say it is my incredible power of persuasion, and I suppose it might have been, or it could have been his long and warm friendship with our congregation Beth Emet in Delaware, and a strong relationship with our movement forged on so many issues of central concern. And I suspect it may not have hurt that we are honoring his friend, David Saperstein, tonight. But in fact, it wasn't a hard sell to convince the Vice President to join us, because just as each of us is drawn here by the tremendous meaning we find in our faith, Vice President Biden himself is a man of deep and abiding faith. And I think he'd be the first to tell you that his faith has inspired, sustained, comforted, and motivated him as a person and as a public servant throughout his life. This summer, a few weeks after my father died, Vice President Biden called to offer his condolences. I was very touched by his call, his warmth, and his extraordinary humanity. As we all know, the Vice President is no stranger to loss, and his resilience and courage are nothing short of inspirational. Vice President Biden's record of service to his community, his state, and his country is unparalleled, starting with his 36 years as a U.S. Senator representing the people of Delaware, and 36, double high. It's a particularly auspicious number. Throughout his tenure, then Senator Biden was a critical leader on so much that we are about. He led the campaign for congressional passage of the landmark 1994 assault weapons ban, part of a long-standing record that continues until today of working to make our communities safer through common sense gun violence prevention. He drafted and spearheaded the enactment of the Violence Against Women Act, holding offenders accountable and ensuring that victims had access to the services and support they needed. He shaped U.S. relations with the global community, including helping bring an end to the Balkan War, whose acts of genocide pained us all so deeply, and forged relationships with leaders on every continent. Those relationships have borne even greater fruit since he became Vice President, where he has played a critical role on every foreign policy decision of the last 7 years and counting, and he is universally acclaimed as a lifelong, steadfast, and wise friend of Israel. And we are honored to have this opportunity to say thank you to Vice President Biden for his lifetime of public service and for the contributions to this country and the world that have touched each of our lives. My friends, please join me in welcoming the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
What a gracious introduction. What a gracious introduction. What a gracious man. Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You better stop. You'll make me change my mind. Please. No, I'm kidding. Oh, Rabbi Jacobs, thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. And it's, you know, over my career, I've had the opportunity to speak to, I guess, thousands of groups. And it makes a difference. And I mean this sincerely. It makes a difference when you get to speak to a group of people with whom you've been through so much, who've been there with you in every single aspect of your career, and with whom you share such deep, abiding beliefs. So it's wonderful, wonderful to be here standing among so many long-standing friends and hopefully new friends. I want to start by adding my thanks and appreciation for David's many years of service to our country, and if you'll excuse the point of personal privilege, as we used to say in the Senate, of service to me. He not only is there all the time for me, he helped educate me. We both came around the same time. He came over the bridge, as he told you, as Nixon was being pardoned. I had been there 2 years earlier, making sure he didn't stay. You know, David and I have been doing this so long together that he used to be Rabbi Saperstein. That's when I first got to know him. Now he's Ambassador Rabbi Saperstein. And not bad title, actually. And that's what he's been, by the way, his entire career. He's been an ambassador. Ambassador for rationality and everything that's good and decent about this country and about Judaism that has been brought to the Congress and brought to the Senate and brought to the city of Washington. And I just want to say to David, I got to see him backstage. I can't see him with the lights here, but although he may have gone. No, I'm only joking. There he is, David. But David, again, personally, I mean it sincerely, thank you. But I know two things for certain. One, me, and two, you. We're not going away. We're not going away. When I got to meet the president of NIFTY, I asked him whether he would I want to remind you, Mr. President, when you are president, and I bring my great-grandchildren by and they say, Joe Biden's in the waiting room, please do not say Joe who. Remember me, all right? Where are all the NIFTY members? That's why this organization, everything you've worked for your whole life, is going to live. You know, a little like the young members of NIFTY, they're not only the future of the community, they're the future of our country. And I'm really inspired by your commitment. You know, and let me also express my condolences for the passing of a former president of Israel, who I understand you had a moment of silence for here. I have been one of the great honors I've had as a United States Senator since I was a young man was getting to meet virtually every president and every prime minister of Israel since 1972. And I've learned a lot. And like so many Israeli leaders, he was devoted so many years to realizing the dream of Israel. And I'm here basically, though, to say thank you. Thank you for all you've done for so many years, for so many people, so many times. We've been partners since before 1972. For I would not be standing here as vice president, as folks from Delaware can tell you, without the early support, and I mean this sincerely, of the small, it's only 1% of my state's population, but the strong, unrelenting support of Delaware's Jewish community that gave me confidence. This is not for an applause line. I mean it sincerely. So many leaders of my community gave me the confidence as a 28-year-old kid to actually run for the Senate. I'm the first United States senator I ever knew. And true. But I would have never, and I mean it sincerely, I would have never had the confidence were it not for leaders in the community early on that encouraged me. I got started in politics without ever realizing I was in politics. I mean this sincerely. As a high school and college kid in the 60s, it was all about, for me, fighting to desegregate my state. The movie theaters, restaurants, making sure my friends and my football team could go to the same takeout restaurants that we could, which initially they couldn't. I look back on those days from the mid-'60s on, and I think of the people who, when I was in those black churches getting ready to march, who I was sitting next to. Their names are Bernie Siegel and Irving Morris and Sonny Sloan and Sid Balick and Henry Topel and so many other leaders of the community. And all those things my mother and father raised me to care about, you, the Jewish community, cared about. And you helped lead the way. And throughout my career, this is not hyperbole, this is a fact, as David will tell you. Throughout my career, I've worked closely on every issue that's mattered to me, including every civil rights and every civil liberties issue. We worked together early on, David, remember reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, extending the Civil Rights Act on several occasions, both of which were originally drafted in part in your offices. We fought together for the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It was a time when I learned an early lesson. I walked on the floor as a young senator. I did not want to be sworn in because I got elected on November the 7th, December 18th. My wife and daughter were killed in an automobile accident. And my two sons were so badly injured they weren't sure they were going to survive. And so I had my brother working with my brother who raised all my money. He was 24 years old. Worked with the incoming Democratic governor to have a replacement. And a guy named Mike Mansfield and a guy named Abe Ribicoff and a few others came to see me to convince me to come, to stay, and just be sworn in. Stay just for 6 months, Joe. We need you to help us organize. We had 58 Democrats. They didn't need me to organize anything, and it would have been replaced by a Democrat. But a wonderful man named Mike Mansfield was the man who finally convinced me. And when I got to the Senate, he was the majority leader of the Senate. And I say this to all of those of you involved in NIFTY. It was one of my early important lessons I learned. I would show up at his office at 3 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon, and I'd get an assignment. And David, I thought every freshman got an assignment. I really did. I thought the majority leader assigned to young senators, new senators, various topics. It wasn't until after about 8 or 10 months I realized he was basically taking my pulse to see how I was doing, to see how I was adjusting. And one day I walked in on the Senate floor, and we were debating the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And Ted Kennedy and and Bob Dole were pushing it. And a guy named Jesse Helms, newly elected senator, same year I was elected, was on the floor excoriating both Kennedy and Dole, and talking about how it wasn't a responsibility of the community, et cetera, to deal with the handicapped, disabled. And I was really angry, but because I had this meeting, I went ahead and went to my meeting. And I walked in, and I must have looked very angry. And I say this to the young people here. And I looked across at Senator Mansfield. He always spoke in clipped tones. And he said, "What's the matter, Joe?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Leader," and I went on, and I went after Jesse Helms. I said, "This man has no social redeeming value. He doesn't care about the handicapped. He doesn't care about the disabled." I went on and on. He let me go on for a while, but it's an important lesson I learned. He looked at me and he said, "Joe, what would you say if I told you? What would you say if I told you that Jesse and Dot Helms," that's Jesse's wife, in 1969 were sitting in their living room in Raleigh, North Carolina, reading the Raleigh Observer, the newspaper. And a young man, if I'm not mistaken, 14 years old, was in leg braces up to his hips in both legs. He was in an orphanage. And the ad for the orphanage said, this young man saying, "All I want is someone to love me and bring me into their home." He said, "What would you say, Joe, if I told you Dot and Jesse Helms adopted that young man as their own child?" I said, "Mr. Leader, I'd feel terrible. I'd feel like a jerk." He said, "Well, they did, Joe. They did. But here's the lesson." He said, "Joe, it's always appropriate to question another man or woman's judgment. It's never appropriate to assume you know their motive." So I say to all the young members of this organization, be passionate. Be passionate, but don't presume. Don't presume to suggest to your opponents what their motives are, because when you do that, there's never an opportunity to reach an agreement. I can disagree with you on the substance, but if I say you are in the pocket of an interest group, I say you don't have a soul, I do attack you like happens in Washington today, you never get anything done. And so that first piece of legislation that we all worked on taught me a lesson. And by the way, eventually, 17 years later, we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act because of you. Together, we defended the right of a woman to choose. Together, we brought home refuseniks from the Soviet Union. Some of you were with me as I made a number of trips to Russia and Eastern Europe to push this issue. We all helped to settle Ethiopian Jews in Israel when it wasn't so popular. Ambassador Saperstein worked with me as I confronted personally Slobodan Milosevic and helped push the Clinton administration to do more to stop ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. You stood up because it was genocide. Many of you stood with me when it wasn't popular when I drafted the Violence Against Women Act, and you were particularly helpful in the passage of the assault weapons ban, this group right here. The last significant gun safety legislation our country passed, all part of the crime bill I wrote back in '94. We advocated together for immigration reform to give 11 million women and men and children a basic dignity they deserve. And you continue to speak out because unlike any other community, any other contemporary community, you understand the meaning of Emma Lazarus' poem on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Because so many of your ancestors needed to breathe free, fleeing prosecution and programs, to come to the United States You don't forget. That's what I love about you. You do not forget. Back in 2012, when I said on Meet the Press that I supported marriage equality, you were the only group. You were the only group other than the LGBT community that uniformly and immediately reached out and supported me. All of you, this community. And then 2 years ago, when I was campaigning for vice president our second term, I met some survivors in Florida, here in Florida, and they told me about the 100,000 Holocaust survivors, 10% of which right here in the United States, living in poverty. So you stepped up when I launched the program to care for those survivors who were in need. You stepped forward. You didn't hesitate. For decades, you've been the heart and soul of opportunity for all Americans. And thank God, nothing has changed with all of you. Nothing. And that's why I'm so, so proud to be associated with you. Just look at your, well, God bless all of you. I mean it sincerely. And by the way, I wasn't joking when I said you educated me. You really did. You did. You didn't just lobby me. You educated me. You helped me. You reinforced everything I learned at my father's dinner table. Look at your agenda the last several days. Social justice, civil rights, economic empowerment. A new resolution expanding inclusion of transgender men and women in your congregations and in your public life. I was so proud of my son, Attorney General Biden, when a young man who worked for him concluded he was transgender and wanted to change, and he did. A beautiful young woman now, and standing my son being criticized, and watch him stand there in front of everyone in a press conference and embrace her. Embrace her. Let me tell you, let me assure you, as usual, where you lead, the rest of the nation eventually follows. No, look, Dave would look at every single issue when you came across that bridge, as you said. Look at every one of the issues you led on and I tried to help on. Every one of them become mainstream. It matters. All of you are respected leaders in not only your community, but the community at large. What you say matters. And you've never stopped standing up for those who are excluded, those left in the margins, even when we have to refight many of the battles we thought we already won, like the Voting Rights Act. Everyone asks me all the time, because I say to the young people, the rest of you know, I'm always referred to as the White House optimist. Like as my grandfather would say, like I fell off the turnip truck yesterday. I know it doesn't look like it, but I've been there longer than any of them. And I'm more optimistic than any of them. I've never been more optimistic in my entire political career. And folks, there's a simple reason. Like you, I know the history of the journey of this great country. It's always eventually forward. And you've always been in the vanguard of moving it forward. I'm not trying to be nice to you. I'm not running again. I mean it. You have always been in the vanguard. So again, thank you for your friendship, as well as your leadership, your courage, your unrelenting belief, and never giving up. For you, it's always been about what my father insisted on. My dad used to say, Joey, everybody, and I mean this sincerely, every one of my siblings heard it repeatedly, every man or woman who knew him. He was a gentle man. He'd say, everyone is entitled to be treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstance, regardless. I suspect that's why he had such a deep and inviting commitment to the formation of the State of Israel. My dad was what you would call a righteous Christian. At my dinner table, where three things were expected. One, you showed up in time. Two, your manners had to be impeccable. And three, you had to be ready to engage in the conversation. For our dinner table is the place where we gather to have conversation and incidentally eat. That's where I first heard the word Holocaust. That's where I first learned about what would happen. My father, who was not a college graduate but a great student of history, would talk about things like what a disappointment it was to him that we never bombed the railroad tracks toward the end of the war, how tragic it was. I learned at my father's table about the St. Louis, packed with Jewish refugees fleeing the Third Reich, close enough to Miami to see the lights, yet turned away. My dad characterized that as simply un-American, un-American. And to him, establishing the State of Israel was the only ultimate guarantor of the dignity of the Jewish people worldwide. He made sure all of his children fully, thoroughly understood what had happened so that history would not repeat itself. He was still alive when I was a United States Senator, and I started the tradition on the 15th birthday of each of my children. I took them to Europe for the first time. We flew directly to Dachau each time. The first thing I wanted them to see was to spend the entire day at Dachau with me, to understand, so they could smell, see, taste, understand what had happened, but mostly to appreciate the overwhelming resiliency of the people. I kept that tradition up through my grandchildren. Just last year, I took my granddaughter, Finnegan Biden, with me to Dachau. By the way, if you've been there lately, I feel badly, it's more sanitized now. It's not nearly as raw, and it's not as apparent. And then my children had the great privilege of getting to know a man who worked for me for years and was a significant man in his own, but he was my employee for years, who was with me when I remarried my wife, when I remarried Jill after my wife had passed. His name was Tom Lantos. He was a survivor. And one of the great things, my boys got to travel with me to Europe with Tom, to Hungary. They got to sit with Tom and hear the stories of the 40s in Budapest. They learned about Raoul Wallenberg and how he saved Tom and his wife Annette and so many others. They never forgot Tom. They never forgot what Tom would constantly repeat, not just to my children, but nationally. Tom would say many times, quote, "The veneer of civilization is paper thin. We are its only guardians, and we can never rest." Like all of you, I've taken that to heart. My grown children have taken to heart. My Beau, my Ashley, my son Hunter. Like all of you, it's why our support for Israel is rooted so deeply in a moral, as well as for most of us, a personal commitment. Israel is a democracy and an ally. And with all allies, we have our differences. As David and many of you remember, I've had my share of disagreements with Israeli leaders, and I've never hesitated to make them known. For once, I never have thought from Menachem Begin on that the settlement policy made any sense. I've known Bibi for over 36 years. We have many private, sometimes close to shouting disagreements about things. I mean it sincerely. But no disagreement I've ever had with an Israeli leader, and no disagreement, quite frankly, President Obama has ever had, has lessened a single iota our enduring, unwavering commitment to be the guarantor of Israel's security. Period. Period. You know that old overwrought joke, two Israelis on a street corner arguing, you get three opinions. Well, that's exactly what we've continued to be, Israel's guarantor. No administration in history, and I've now served with 8 presidents, by the way, none has done more for Israel's security than the Obama-Biden administration. We have our disagreements, but we have taken our security cooperation, to use Bibi's, Prime Minister Netanyahu's word, to unprecedented levels. His quote, not mine. We provided historic levels of security assistance to Israel, more than $3 billion a year. That's over $8 million a day in security assistance. We provided another $3 billion to help Israel advance its rocket and missile defense system that have saved countless Israeli lives. Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow system. And we are continuing to make sure Israel maintains what we call a qualitative military advantage in advanced weapons, including the F-35 Joint Fighter Strike Force. And Israel is the only nation in the Middle East with a 5th-generation aircraft. Our commitment to Israel's security, touches every aspect of our relationship: intelligence sharing, cybersecurity, scientists collaborating on cutting-edge technology. And so while we occasionally did disagree and sometimes vehemently disagree, the core of our alliance is as solid as steel. No one president or prime minister can alter that, no matter what they do. And that's why, from the outset, Barack and I have been determined to make sure that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon. There was a great deal of disagreement within our community about the Iran nuclear deal. And as some of you know, I was initially a skeptic. But this is a solid agreement. It's the best way to prevent Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon, which would be an existential threat to Israel. So I'm exceedingly proud that President Obama and Secretary John Kerry were able to negotiate the Iran deal. But here's what I want to say to you. Thank you for not bowing to the pressure you received to condemn it right out of the gate before you even knew what it said, for withholding your judgment until you had the facts. And thanks so many of you to have the courage to step up and support it. I respect those of you who did not support it, once you at least listened to the facts. But the way you handled the issue was reflective of who you are, individually as an organization. It made a great difference. But I'm here to tell you what I've told every Jewish audience, and I'm going to say something outrageous. There's nobody in American politics today, not one single person, who I will take second place to in my affection and defense of Israel. Not one single person. I say that not for ratification, but because I guarantee you we are going to ensure that Iran lives up to all of its commitments in that deal. If they cheat, we'll know it, and sanctions will snap back. If they continue, all options remain on the table, including the use of military force. We simply will not permit Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, period. Period. But I'm not here to talk about that deal. What I'm going to talk about is aftermath. Notwithstanding that the deal takes the nuclear weapon off the table, Israel still lives in a very dangerous neighborhood. A very dangerous neighborhood. Threats from Hamas and other radicalized militants in the Gaza, jihadists in Sinai, ISIL, or as they say in the Middle East among the Arab nations, Daesh, al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda branch in Syria, just across on the Golan Heights, tens of thousands of rockets and missiles in the hands of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a continued effort by Iran, a continued effort with conventional weapons to attempt to destabilize the region, threatening both Israel's interest and ours. We are committed to providing Israel with whatever it needs to defend itself by itself. And it's clear to everyone, including the Iranians, we've made no bones about this. We will continue to enhance Israel's capacity to defeat any enemy, and we will have Israel's back, period. As I speak, for the last several weeks, and as I speak and all through next week and the remainder of this month, we are keeping the commitment we made to sit down with Israel intelligence and defense leadership to mutually determine what best meets their needs across the board. And look, Minister Yalon, the Israeli Minister of Defense, was just in Washington to meet with our Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, on this very issue. And in 36 hours, I'll be sitting down with President Obama and Bibi, and then with Bibi alone in my office. And we'll discuss with the Prime Minister, both in the Oval Office as well as mine, how we can continue to deepen our security cooperation and address new realities in the region. So let me be unmistakably clear. As President Obama has said repeatedly, Americans' commitment to Israel's security is rock solid and unshakable. And in the meantime, we're going to continue to stand up to the other, I think, more serious threat to Israel's security. And that's the attempt by so many in the world to delegitimize Israel as a nation state. To delegitimize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, a Jewish democratic state in the region. Admittedly, no country should be immune from criticism, but the bigoted attacks, the efforts to delegitimize Israel are little more than anti-Semitism, plain and simple. And we will not hesitate to call it out when it occurs, wherever it occurs, as long as it occurs. That's a greater threat. And we will continue to have Israel's back as you do. And it's precisely because we have Israel's back that we are so deeply concerned about the new cycle of violence that has taken hold in Jerusalem, the West Bank, Israel, and the Gaza Strip in recent weeks. So let me make one final point, because quite frankly, it's tragic. And I know it's on all of your minds, and it is mine. We have strongly condemned Palestinian acts of terrorism against Israel and inflammatory rhetoric that inspires random acts of violence. Young people wielding knives, attacking at random, Palestinians turning their cars into deadly weapons. It is despicable and it's dangerous for the entire region. There is an argument. There's an urgent need, though, to take steps to restore the calm and diffuse the tension. Both sides need to demonstrate restraint and avoid incitement. We don't want another intifada. We don't want to risk violence escalating any further. These sad events are a visceral reminder that we have to find our way back to achieving a lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. This past week marked 20 years since the assassination of a friend, and he was my friend, as is his wife, one of Israel's great leaders, Yitzhak Rabin. As we honor his legacy of leadership, we have to remember that he was a man dedicated to the hope of peace. However hard it may be to see the path to peace, we should never abandon the hope of achieving a two-state solution, two peoples living side by side in peace and security. Nothing would ensure Israel's long-term security and further the Jewish and democratic state of Israel than a two-state solution. And I know all of you are committed to that future as well. So let's stop the talk of abandoning that goal. Let me conclude by saying once again, no one need worry about the future of the relationship between Israel and the United States. And although we won't always agree, this is the one thing I do want to say. We should always be respectful of one another. There is no excuse. There should be no tolerance for any member or employee of an Israeli administration referring to the President of the United States in derogatory terms. Period. 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 There is no justification for a Israeli voice degrading the Secretary of State who's worked so hard for so long for the security of Israel. But notwithstanding even those terrible comments, no one can undermine our relationship or our long-term commitment to the security and the future of the Jewish democratic state of Israel. We stand as one because the Israeli survival is critical to the well-being of Jewish communities worldwide, and it will be for a long, long, long time. I say to the nifty folks, I learned another lesson as a 30-year-old young senator when I first traveled to Egypt and then to Israel. I was the only one let into Egypt at the time after the Six-Day War. I was allowed to go out to the Sinai. Then I came back and I flew from Cairo to Jerusalem. It was 1973. And I met a remarkable woman, Golda Meir. And I sat, this is important to hear the story. I sat in front of her desk, and many of you have been in that office. I know David has, it's still the same office. And she had, every Israeli prime minister has a slightly different arrangement in the office. But she had behind her like you had in high school, a book of maps that you could pull down in a great big board. And she kept pulling the maps down, explaining what happened in the Six-Day War and how many were killed, and reading me letters of what had happened. I was sitting next to a young assistant of hers We were looking at each other. His name was Rabin. No, for real. It's hard to believe I'm that old. But I guess I was so taken by her presentation, and she was chain smoking the whole time. And all of a sudden she looked at me and she said, "Senator, would you like a photo opportunity?" I said, "Yes, Madam Prime Minister." It's a true story. And outside the Prime Minister's office, there's a little hallway. It's like a reception area. It's just, there's offices off it. It's probably, I'm guessing, 40 feet square, something like that. And we walked out those double doors, and we're standing there with a bank of cameras and photographers. And they were snapping pictures. And I was standing next to her. And she looked straight ahead, but she was talking to me. She said, "Senator, don't look so worried." It's a true story. She said, "Don't look so worried." And I found myself, I turned and looked at her. And I said, "But," she says, "No." She didn't let me finish. She said, "We Israelis, we Jews have a secret weapon in our fight with the Arabs. You see, Senator, we have nowhere else to go. Senator, we have nowhere else to go." It was seared into my consciousness. Even though America is open and many other places, the truth of the matter is, for world Jewry, the only guarantor, absolute guarantor, that there's some place to go is Israel. So we have an obligation for our own safety, as well as the safety of the Jews around the world. We have an obligation to make sure Israel remains a growing, vibrant state, ultimately able to be guaranteed by only one thing: living in peace with its neighbors. So there's a certainty that there's always a place to go. As we take the steps to continue to strengthen the security of Israel, I know we can count on your support. You've led it. So let me end by saying thank you once again for all you do, not for Israel alone, but all you do for America. For you know, and David's heard me say this before, and I get criticized saying it, I make no apologies. Were there no Israel, we would have to invent one. Israel is overwhelmingly, not just a moral obligation, in the national security interest of the United States of America as well. What I want to thank you most for, though, is for never remaining silent, for never hedging your commitment for the pursuit of justice, for enforcing the foundational values of America, for answering the Jewish injunction to heal the world, tikkun olam. You really have taught me a great deal, and I'm grateful for you, grateful to you. So may God continue to bless the state of Israel and the United States of America, and may God bless our troops. Thank you.